Hello, I'm Mike Egan. You are watching my 2021 Game of the Year countdown, outlining my top 10 video games of the year. Every year for the past couple of years, regardless of whatever else I've been working on, I've always written up a Game of the Year list that I've posted on my blog, and I'm still going to be doing that this year, but I also want to do something a little bit extra, a video series in several parts counting down my top 10 games of the year released in the lead up to the holidays, and that's what you're watching right now. So, without further ado, number 2 is Final Fantasy VII. I have a confession to make. Prior to this year, I had never played any Final Fantasy game. I'd written the whole series off at some point. I'd gotten the idea that they were all long, dull, self-serious, and just boring. And then early this year, after witnessing a year of hype over the Final Fantasy VII remake, and in the interest of challenging beliefs that I hold for no discernible reason, I decided it was time. I chose Final Fantasy VII partly due to the hype, because the remake sounds really cool and genuinely seems like it does some interesting things, but also because ever since its original release in 1997, it has been, for a lot of people, the Final Fantasy game. The one of note, the one you should play. I picked up the game on Switch so that I could play in bed, because JRPGs can be very good cozy time games. And while perusing the Nintendo eShop page, I came across 3 interesting bullet points touting some extra features added to this port of the game, namely 3x speed mode, the ability to turn off battle encounters, and a battle enhancement mode. We'll come back to these later. For now, let's cut right to the chase. Why do people love Final Fantasy VII? People love Final Fantasy VII for its story and its characters. Final Fantasy VII is a globe-trotting sci-fi fantasy epic about a group of eco-terrorists on the run from a corporation who owns a city which runs on the literal souls of the dead. Final Fantasy VII is a conservatively 50 to 60 hour HBO series about childhood sweethearts, climate change, corporate greed, war profiteering, betrayal, grief, self-realization, unethical resource extraction, what they mean when they tell you to never meet your heroes, and chocobo racing. To put it another way, it's better than most seasons of TV. Look, I'm not going to stand here and review Final Fantasy VII, a game that was released when I was 4 years old. What could I possibly say that hasn't already been said by people who know much more than I? What I can do is tell you about my experience, and my experience of Final Fantasy VII hinged largely on those 3 extra features I mentioned earlier. Seeing those 3 extra features and realizing what they would mean for my experience of this game, and by extension, a series and genre I'd previously been unsure about, is what ultimately got me to click the buy button. Now, I have another confession to make. I was lying before when I said that I'd never played a Final Fantasy game before this year, and when I said that I held certain beliefs about Final Fantasy for no discernible reason. Sometime back in middle school or junior high, I don't remember, I found out about emulators. Having been an indoor kid who followed video game news online, I knew about Final Fantasy despite never having played the games. So one of the very first games I fired up in my shiny new SNES 9X executable was Final Fantasy IV. Final Fantasy IV starts, if I'm remembering correctly, with a lengthy cutscene aboard an airship. And so the very first emotion that I experienced while playing a Final Fantasy game was boredom. By the time I arrived on a screen with which I could actually interact, I felt lost. When I hit my first monster encounter, I watched a pretty cool JPEG of a monster appear on screen and then tried to fumble my way through a series of menus I didn't understand to try to make a battle happen. It's so interesting to me now recounting this because at this point in my life, I had definitely played and enjoyed a Pokemon game. What was it about this that was so different? Anyway, that's why I thought I didn't like Final Fantasy games. I'm sorry for the obfuscation, but sometimes you gotta get from A to B. It's important that I explain that because with that as my only prior experience of Final Fantasy outside of watching any number of series staples eat up way too much of any number of GDQs, the prospect of speeding up the game and avoiding random encounters seemed like direct answers to my problems with Final Fantasy specifically and JRPGs in general. So let's run through those 3 options that I mentioned and talk about why each of them is great. First, the ability to speed up the game by 3 times. At the press of a button, the game enters a kind of fast-forward mode and everything from character animations to cutscenes to dialogue speeds way the hell up. This is really great because sometimes things take a long time in RPGs. Sometimes the world map is really big and you don't remember what one specific town looks like. Rather than waste 25 minutes literally walking all over the planet trying to find it or look up a walkthrough while trying not to spoil the story, I can click a little button and turn into the Flash for a little bit. Next, the ability to turn off random encounters. A lot of classic JRPGs feature random battle encounters, where you'll be walking along on the world map and suddenly, bang, you're attacked. The idea being that, in fiction, your party ran into a monster or group of monsters. This gets old really fast for me, especially if I'm lost, and even if I'm just trying to enjoy and stay in the game. By the time I've hit my 3rd or 4th low-level monster encounter in the space of 30 seconds, I'm about done. I get it. Being able to turn these off and on at will saved me a lot of grief. And finally, Battle Enhancement Mode. In my head, I always called this Beef Mode, because it beefs up all of your characters in battle. What this means in practice in this game is that everyone in your party has health and mana that instantly refills the second that they lose any, and their limit break gauges fill every turn so that they can continually use their most powerful attacks. Now, some folks might argue that these options break the game or some kind of special holistic experience, and first of all, shut up. But second of all, it actually feels like some great care and thought went into the design and inclusion of these options. For starters, the beef mode is limited in a few key ways, including that your health doesn't refill until after you lose it, so that if you're dealt a one-hit killing blow, you're still dead, and you don't auto-revive. Your attacks don't do 9,999 damage, and you don't magically avoid every attack levied against you. So you can't just turn on beef mode and sprint to the end of the game. You still need to level yourself up along the curve that the game intends for you. And while the ability to turn off random encounters saves you from having to fight the same level 1 rat or whatever 600 times, you cannot skip any battles required to advance the story. So again, no beating the game at level 1. You might think that this would all still leave you weirdly underleveled or force you to have to grind a bunch, but I didn't find that to be the case. The fact is, with all 3 of these options at my disposal, I really only turned off random encounters in a handful of cases. Like if I died before making it to a save point and had to run back through the area that I'd just completed from a previous save. In most cases, and especially once I was very familiar with battle strategy, I was content to simply turn on the 3x speed mode and just burn through whatever little battles I had to. Or, if I was particularly bored, turn on both 3x speed mode and beef mode and just get through it. After all, the music that plays after winning a battle is certainly worth hearing a few hundred times. And here's where we get to the bottom line. In the end, I found that I didn't want or need to use these options most of the time, because as I found, Final Fantasy VII is a damn good game that's really well designed. I'd still lobby for random encounters to be turned way the hell down, but regardless, Final Fantasy VII is just really fun. It turns out that its mechanics are really interesting and fun to pick at, and it's fun to build up your squad with new items and abilities. A battle encounter can feel cinematic and weighty, or it can feel like solving a puzzle, or it can just make you feel like a god when you absolutely crush a low-level monster. It can feel like a slog, yes, but it often doesn't. Final Fantasy VII pulls enough of its own weight to not make you feel that way. Also, all of the music kicks complete ass. All of the characters are my children and I would die for them, and the story is so engrossing and well written. More than once, and this is coming from someone who previously derided Final Fantasy games, more than once this game made me gasp aloud or well up with real tears. My conclusion is this: I am not one of those people who devours 60-hour RPGs one after another. Maybe I am now, I don't know. But if you, like me, have been keeping yourself from experiencing Final Fantasy or JRPGs or anything in your life, take a risk, take a chance, make a change, and play Final Fantasy VII. It's transcendent, and it's my second favorite thing I played in 2021. Hey, thank you once again for watching. Thank you for continuing to stay on the path of my 2021 Top 10 Game of the Year countdown. Next up, this is it, baby. The final one. The final countdown. Well, the whole thing is the countdown. Number 1 is coming up next. Any guesses? What could it be? It's a game I've talked about before. If you've been paying close attention, you might figure it out. All right, I'll see you there tomorrow. Let's end this thing.